Step back to 1893, where Chicago's grand stage hosted a wild experiment. The world's Parliament of Religions. Picture monks, sages, and pastors sharing one spotlight, promising peace, but sparking tension. A Hindu monk dazzled the crowd, while Christians wrestled with the question, can all faiths be equal when Jesus claimed to be the only way? Welcome back, friends, to the Church History Podcast. I'm your host, Lorelee Siemens, and today we're stepping into a moment that changed the way the world saw religion. I want to start by asking you to be kind today. This episode talks about people from a lot of different parts of the world, and their names are, well, hard to pronounce. And I've spent the morning on the How to Pronounce website trying to find the right pronunciations. But I know I'm going to be butchering these names. But just know I tried my best. Before we dive into today's episode, let me remind you of the two books I have available for sale. My new book, The Church is Corrupt, is available for order. I previously published the book, The Church is Born, which was part 1 in our series, and that delved into the creation of the church. But my second book picks up where the first one left off. It offers a unique and insightful perspective on the church's journey. Discover the rich history of the church, its triumphs, its failures, and its heroes. In this second book in the series on church history, we journey through the pivotal moments that shaped Christianity as we know it. From the foundational theology of the early church to the inspiring lives of great men and women who boldly stood for their faith. Explore the church's role during the Crusades, the Inquisitions, and even the discovery of America. Learn how over centuries the church began to slowly lose its way, setting the stage for the momentous changes just before the Protestant Reformation. With each chapter highlighting a different story, you're going to be inspired by the heroes of our faith and challenged to reflect on the lessons from the church's successes and its stumbles. Whether you're a seasoned historian or just beginning your exploration of church history, this book offers valuable insights for everyone. Both books, The Church is Born and The Church is Compromised, are available on Amazon for you to order. So if you haven't gotten the first book, why not get both today and delve into the comprehensive understanding of the church's journey? Picture this. It's 1893, and the city of Chicago is buzzing with excitement. The World Exposition is in full swing. Think towering Ferris wheels, glittering pavilions, and inventions that promise a bold new future. But amid all the noise and wonder, something even bigger is about to unfold. It's called the World's Parliament of Religions, and it's the first time in history that voices of faith across the globe gathered under one roof. This is a story of dreams, dazzling speeches, and a clash of beliefs. Impact our church today. So grab a seat, let's dive in. It's September 11th, 1893, and the Art Institute of Chicago is packed to the rafters. Thousands of people, curious onlookers, scholars, and believers, fill the hall, their eyes fixed on a stage. There's a Buddhist monk in saffron robes, an Indian sage in a turban, a Muslim convert from America, and Christian pastors in stiff collars. This is a sight to behold, and the air crackles with anticipation. This is the World's Parliament of Religions, and it's the brainchild of one man, Charles Carroll Bonney. Charles was from Sweden, and he was a layman with a crazy dream. He imagined this grand gathering where every religion stood side by side, sharing their beliefs like neighbors who swap stories over the fence. He teamed up with a man named John Henry Burroughs, who was a Christian clergyman with a knack of organization, and together they pulled off what most people thought was impossible. For 17 days, from September 11th till the 27th, this parliament heard from Hindus, Jainisms, Islam, Buddhists, and Christianity, and even some mystical groups. Charles saw it as a chance to prove all religions could unite under a shared moral banner. But not everyone agreed, especially those who believed firmly in the words of Jesus, who said, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me." Now, let's take you to opening day. The crowd is buzzing as a young Indian monk steps up to the podium. His name is Vivekananda, and he's dressed in flowing orange robes that make him stand out like a flame. He takes a deep breath, looks out at the sea of faces, and begins, "Sisters and brothers of America." Before he can say another word, the room explodes. People leap to their feet, clapping and cheering for a full 2 minutes. His voice is steady, his words like music, and he speaks in an Indian accent, and he calls for tolerance and unity. He is a star from that moment on. He becomes a rock star for religion. But while the crowd ate it up, Christians in the room shifted uneasily in their seats. His message was beautiful, sure, but it nudged at something they couldn't ignore. If all faiths lead to the same truth, what happens to the gospel? What happens to salvation is found in no one else, which you can read in Acts chapter 4, verse 12. And that tension hung in the air. It was like a storm cloud people wanted to ignore. As the days rolled on, the stage became a parade of voices. Anagarika Dharmaparla, who was a Buddhist from Sri Lanka, painted pictures of mindfulness and enlightenment, and a man named Gandhi, who was a Jain scholar, spoke of nonviolence so passionately you could feel the reverence in the room. Mohammed Alexander Russell Webb, who was an American who found Islam, shared his winding road to faith. And then there were Christians who were preaching about Christ's love, but they were surrounded by ideas that challenged their core. There were even mystics who chimed in. It was a feast of thought, no doubt about it. But for evangelical Christians, like a young Baptist seminary student who scribbled a letter home, it was a tight-rope walk. This Baptist student wrote, "But I feel we're trading truth for harmony. The world needs Christ, not confusion." For him, and like others, the Parliament's big idea that all religions were equal paths to God felt like a betrayal of the Bible's clear call. 1 Timothy chapter 2, verse 5 says, "There is one mediator between God and man, the man, Christ Jesus." When the gavel fell on September 27, 1893, the Parliament wrapped up with cheers and headlines. Newspapers called it a new dawn for religious understanding. And in many ways it was. Westerners for the first time met Hinduism and Buddhism face to face. And there was the seed of interfaith dialogue that got planted. But not everyone celebrated. Evangelicals walked away from this very troubled. They saw a world that was drifting towards pluralism, where human wisdom trumped God's revelation. And they weren't wrong when they wondered, what happens when you put every faith on the same shelf? Does the gospel get lost in the shuffle? Now, there was some hope at this same time. In the past, I've done episodes on D.L. Moody, and D.L. Moody was at the same time at the same fair. He was preaching during the 1893 Chicago World's Fair, but he would not take part in the official World's Parliament of Religion. Instead, Moody saw the fair as an evangelical opportunity, and he held his own separate campaign. Moody organized a rally literally across the street from the Parliament of Religions. He set up a large circus tent near the fairgrounds, and he conducted evangelical meetings. And this became known as the Chicago Campaign of 1893, and it's considered one of Moody's greatest evangelical endeavors. Thousands reportedly came to Christ directly across the road from this Parliament of Religion. There were some church leaders who criticized the World Parliament of Religion by boycotting it and telling everyone not to even go to the Chicago Fair. But Moody instead called people to come to the Chicago Fair as an opportunity for evangelism. And this approach was to engage the crowds attending the fair rather than just isolating himself from the event entirely. If you want to know more about D.L. Moody, I'm going to put links to those episodes in the show notes. Fast forward a century to 1993, and the Parliament was back, revived again in Chicago. This was to mark its 100th birthday. This time it wasn't a kickoff. It was a movement. It popped up a few years around the globe. It was in Cape Town, where they tackled AIDS, Barcelona, where there was religious violence, in Melbourne, where they wanted to have reconciliation with the Aboriginals. By 2015, in Salt Lake City, over 9,000 people joined in. They were talking climate change and justice. And in 2023, it returned to Chicago, looking back at its roots while facing today's challenges. In 1993, they adopted what they called Towards a Global Ethic. This was a document by theologian Hans Kung, who dreamed of a shared moral code for all faiths. And this time, one of the keynote speakers was the Dalai Lama. This was even bigger than the 1893 because they included voices like indigenous spiritualities. But evangelicals still held that same tension. So what's the legacy of all this? Some people see it as a triumph for peace and understanding, a bridge to cross divides. But as an evangelical myself, I see this as a cautionary tale. Possibly some people in these parliaments, maybe their heart was in the right place. Romans chapter 12 verse 18 says, if possible, live at peace with everyone. So was this just a way for everyone to live at peace with separate religions? But there's a stumble. By treating all faiths as equal, this dilutes the gospel. Jesus didn't say, I'm one way among many. He said, I am the way in John chapter 14 verse 6. Think about it. If we're called to make disciples of all nations, like Matthew chapter 28 commands, can we afford to blur the lines? The Parliament's push was for a shared ethic. That sounds noble, but it also incorporates syncretism, which is mixing truth with ideas, and the Bible warns against that. Paul didn't mince words in 2 Corinthians chapter 6. He said, do not be yoked with unbelievers. And yet here we are, dialoguing our way to a Tower of Babel. Human pride, building unity without God at the center. The Parliament skipped over the hard stuff. They didn't talk about the persecution of Christians in places where other faiths hold sway. They talked about harmony and handshakes. But where was the voice of those suffering for Christ? Matthew chapter 5 promises blessing for the persecuted, not applause for the compromisers. Don't get me wrong. I believe we're called to engage the world with love and respect. Paul did it in Athens. He chatted with philosophers about their unknown God, but then he pointed them to Jesus. You'll find that story in Acts chapter 17. He didn't stop at dialogue. He proclaimed the truth. The Parliament, it's more about listening than proclaiming. And that's a missed chance to share the only hope that transforms lives, Christ alone. As we end this episode, the Parliament of the world's religion stands as a mirror. It reflects a hunger for peace, a clash of convictions, and a challenge for us as believers. How do we speak truth in love? Ephesians chapter 4 verse 15 urges us to speak truth in love. But how do we do that without blending it? How do we stand firm in a world that loves gray over black and white? That's a story I leave with you today. The Parliament opened its door in 1893, and it's still swinging wide open. Where does it lead? Well, that's up to us and the God who holds the final word. Thanks for joining me on the Church History Podcast. Until next time, keep seeking and asking questions and keep the faith. Remember to check out my book. You can find it on LoreleeSiemens.com. And if you liked this episode, or if you think there's somebody else who would love to hear this episode, share it with a friend. I'll see you next week when we're going to look into another story from Africa. If you enjoyed today's episode, make sure to subscribe on YouTube or your favorite podcast app so you don't miss an episode. We release new content every Monday. And don't forget to check out our website at LoreleeSiemens.com for more information and additional resources. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week as we continue our journey through the incredible history of the church.